Hey, hey. Cool. So welcome to another Wednesday Hangout where we talk about awesome techniques surrounding the Offworld Live 360 rendering. This week, I thought it'd be really cool to talk about benchmarking and testing what kind of render solution is best for you, comparing the Offworld Live 360 rendering to Unreal Engine's vanilla panoramic capture, and just looking at time-based benchmarks, but also visual comparisons. The kind of benchmarking or deciding which sort of render route to go down is quite a multifaceted thing to look at, because you could look at time, you could also look at workflows, you could look at a lot of different factors that make up whether you're going to choose one route to go down. So we were just looking at making some kind of render comparison, side by side kind of renders, because it's very useful to see the kind of differences in image quality and the amount of time that these renders take. So yeah, while I was doing that, I was just like, maybe this is a good topic for a stream this week. So yeah, benchmarking time-wise, some quite interesting stuff, but then also there's some visual to go with it. So I'm just going to bring up this side by side to start with. We're going to make these available on the website so you can really have an in-depth look at this. But obviously we're trying to make it as fair as possible. It's got to be a fair test. Although I'm biased, I'm very proud of our plugin. We've got to try and do these tests as fair as possible. So I've been working really hard to try and get these two renders to look as similar as possible. Just quickly with this image, what I've kind of noticed is that the two are not far off. They both kind of take on the bloom of this scene. The scene is quite bloom heavy, so I thought that was quite an interesting test. We can see UE panoramic capture on the right here and Offworld Live on the left. And yeah, from just doing the side by side kind of scrub, you can immediately see some differences. Trying to match the exposure and the bloom in each camera as much as possible. There is still this kind of slightly, if you look at the kind of detail of this pot, it's kind of a loss of detail here in the UE panoramic capture side. If we can zoom in a bit further, we can see where it's feeling kind of overexposed, feeling kind of muddy in these kind of areas. Maybe if you start looking up here as well, we can see like there's a real image clarity difference, kind of specular on this foot or this bit of rock. It's a lot less smudged. These are both at 4K, and yeah, it's interesting to see this like detail kind of difference. Again, like there could be further tweaks that I could make to kind of match this out, balance this out, but from where, from taking a fair bit of time to try and match these, and kind of interesting to compare out the box as well. There's just kind of an interesting difference in image quality there. Before we move on to looking at different images, I thought it would be interesting to talk about times as well. So as a very basic kind of benchmark, you could kind of just look at how long do, say, 50 frames take you. And like kind of quite a simple way to do that would be to look at the first frame and the last frame in, say, a 50 frame render. But for me, so we can say like date modified on frame 0, 131, date modified on frame 50, 118. Sorry, so okay, that might be because I've re-rendered some of these. So if we go from well, you get the idea anyway. You could say like from frame 0 to frame 14, it took 1 minute. But obviously this isn't super in depth. I was looking at rendering smaller amounts of frames, like say 10 frames. So then kind of every second kind of matters, because then you can kind of multiply out and get a rough idea of how much kind of longer frames would take. But there are also other differences with, say, warm-up time, and we have a longer render on the final frame of our image, but that means you could just render one more frame than you intend, and then that final frame won't matter so much as it being a bit longer. But to get a bit more specific with some benchmarks, can show this doc. So in this kind of stylized Tokyo level, which we can show in a second, we're looking at 11 frames at 8K. I did 3 runs using ours, and we got a 23 seconds, a 28 seconds, and a 24 seconds. So, you know, the average being somewhere around 25, 26. But I've got some other details here where it says sort of the last frame in this took 8 seconds. So, you know, a third of that time was spent on the last frame. Here, I've also taken into account the warm-up. So 10 seconds warm-up. So that's before the actual rendering starts, when the first frame is or when the game is kind of compiling, ready for the first frame. That's this kind of warm-up time. So obviously, if you're rendering a big sequence, the 10-second warm-up doesn't matter too much. But if you're pumping out kind of example renders, the warm-up starts to become important. So with this, like 9 or 8 seconds for the final frame and this 10 seconds of warm-up, the actual bulk of the rendering took 4 seconds. So 11 frames at 8K taking 4 seconds is pretty great, especially when you kind of multiply it out. So then we did a rerun of 51 frames. Again, 10 seconds warm-up, 10 seconds on the last frame, but 29 seconds to do 50 frames. So it's really interesting to see this when compared to the UE panoramic. We get 3 minutes of warm-up, and that is with a specific setting set, which I'll talk about in a minute. But with that setting, you get this much longer warm-up, which is obviously kind of not great if you're looking at pumping out kind of example renders, especially with the fact that the UE panoramic doesn't have a kind of preview like our render target does. Yeah, it's kind of this 3-minute warm-up becomes really annoying as you're, you know, pumping out test renders. The main rendering took 1 minute 13, so even without this massive warm-up, the main rendering is an order of magnitude bigger, longer than our 4 seconds. So incredibly quicker for this test. Second try was about the same, a little bit longer on the warm-up, a little bit longer on the main rendering. And then out to 51 frames, we did 47 seconds. This took 9 minutes, 46 seconds. Again, order of magnitude longer. And I'm not trying to just dig into the UE panoramic here. I'm trying to do a fair test between the two. Just looking at the results. So again, this 4-minute warm-up, so around, you know, only a minute longer for the warm-up. Looked like it was going up as I continued testing, so maybe there's something else going on under the hood there. Cache is building up or something. And then 5 minutes for the main rendering. So really, the comparison here is 51 frames takes 5 minutes for UE Pano, whereas it takes 30 seconds for our render to do the same 8K. So this is a lot quicker when you turn off this very particular setting in the UE panoramic capture. With that disabled, you get 21 seconds, which is a lot closer. Yeah, in fact, quicker than ours for this. But the drawback of that is that if we look at the project, we check out the render settings here. This allocate history per pane. So this consumes a lot more memory, but enables TAA and other history-based effects, denoisers, etc. to work. When you look at this in 5.6, it also mentions that this enables lumen to work as well. So I think what you're getting if you turn this off is kind of a screen space render. For this scene in particular, this was massive. The kind of screen space, the lumen, global illumination, was carrying a lot of this scene. So we look at like the post-process volume. We'll go global illumination. Turning that off completely changes the whole feel of the scene. You know, you could probably change the lighting a bit to make it feel a bit warmer, but more and more in Unreal, a lot of these scenes are using lumen to carry their whole kind of lighting, their whole feeling. And this isn't the same for every level. It's very level dependent, but it's kind of interesting to see that if you want to get sort of similar render times to what we can do with lumen, with the UE panoramic, you have to turn this off. So, you know, we're going back to the old days of Unreal pre-lumen. And then if you do turn that on again, you've got that very long warm-up time and quite long render times. So this setting was sort of one that I found, this allocate history per pane. I found that this made the image match a lot more to what you expect from the viewport, but it does give you that like 3-minute warm-up time, and then yeah, a lot longer renders. We check out some of these renders. So let's do a comparison here. Okay, so I can quickly pump out this render again to show you. Turning this off, and go out to the panoramic. Okay, yeah, got it there actually. Cool. So this is an example of the render with this allocate history per pane turned off. The lighting is just totally not what I expected. You can kind of see stuff that looks like when I turn that global illumination off, but it really doesn't look like the scene whatsoever. And this isn't just an exposure thing, because the stuff that's in the light is exposed kind of as you would expect. Something funny going on here that I just didn't really dig into massively, but I found that the allocate history per pane in the UE panoramic brings it to a lot more what you'd expect. Like this is probably what you'd expect. But what this means is that we can't throw any other anti-aliasing samples at it, because if you want to use anti-aliasing, not just temporal anti-aliasing, you go back to this and you have to work with this. So I tried changing exposure, tried a couple other things. It's just very strange. It seems kind of specific to this level, in fairness. There are other levels that seems to behave better off the bat, but looks like turning on this allocate history per pane is kind of a must for getting things looking exactly how you would want it. It's a must for if you want to use Lumen. And yeah, this then means that you can't really use anti-aliasing and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. I think we could go back to these like comparisons. Back to this sort of Aztec temple level. Here I tried, if you remember, this was the one before with bloom on, and you know, I was seeing a bit less image kind of clarity, you know, a lot less crisp, and obviously this becomes really important when you're looking at really, really high res. If you're looking at your stuff through a VR headset, this stuff very quickly becomes apparent. You know, a dome might smooth it over a bit better, but you want these like fine detailed speculars. So I thought maybe it's the bloom causing this. So I just totally turned the bloom off in every instance that I could kind of see it affecting anything. And then just comparing this again, you still get this like a lot less image clarity. Not sure why that is, but interesting to see that out of the box. It's yeah, quite a difference there. Again, especially if you're looking at this through a headset, that's going to become really important. You might be able to look at rendering a higher resolution and downscaling. I've just had a thought while we're looking at this that this does have a setting called bilinear. Right, maybe it's in a newer version. I'm in 5.3 here. It's changed to 5.6. Let's see. Yeah, it's interesting that it might be doing some kind of like bilinear smoothing, which is kind of a form of anti-aliasing where it's like smoothing pixel colors together. But I just thought interesting that, you know, taking off the bloom completely did not affect it. Still has this like slightly less image clarity there. Thought I'd try an underwater level as well. And these are like, I'm still working on getting these to match as good as possible because obviously these are like total different exposure. So not totally fair test here right now. But seeing a lot more clarity again here. I don't know if this feels like a post-process effect that I need to match up. So yeah, again, not totally convinced this is the fairest test here, but at least interesting to note that it takes a lot of work to get this one to feel like the viewport, whereas this kind of just didn't take any extra settings to get this feeling nice and clear. We got a lot going on here because it's an underwater level. You got kind of chromatic aberration. You got this kind of displacement effect to make it feel like there's water ripples as you're underwater. There's a lot of bloom, a lot of light shafts. So it's kind of a nightmare for 360, but it's great to see that it is kind of handling a lot of this with the kind of face blend that we talked about last week when we were talking about post-process effects. The OWL rendering is taking most of that and working with it. Interesting to see we've lost this up here. I wonder if we can bring that back somehow. And yeah, in general, I don't think I've totally matched the post-process for both of these renders, but yeah, always interesting to do these side-by-side comparisons. Kind of interesting to note that I took this up to 5.6 as well, and for 51 frames we took 59 seconds. That's with 24 seconds of warm up and 10 seconds for the last frame. So you could almost remove 35 seconds from that to get an idea of how you could multiply that out to more frames. And then there's took 5 minutes 47 seconds. 3 minutes 41 for the main render, 2 minutes of warm up. It's interesting that ours increased, almost double. The panoramic also increased by like 25%. So I guess maybe this is just 5.6 having more features. Maybe our plugin having more features, meaning it's a little slower because it's rendering a lot more of the fancy stuff that the newer version of Unreal is doing. But yeah, interesting to see that kind of comparison up to 5.6. Talking about kind of rendering super high resolution. Let's see if I can get one up to show. Got a 10K here to show. Maybe not right here. Oh, here we go. So this is UE panoramic. Oh, with the anti-aliasing weirdness. It is capable of 10K. Oh, yeah, that's right. So it's capable of 10K, but only if you don't turn off that allocate history per pane setting. So of course this kind of shows that it is able to render this, but as soon as you turn that setting on that enables bloom and temporal anti-aliasing and denoising, it's unable to render 10K. Even when I upped the tiles, I did not try the tiling through movie render graph, so maybe it is only it's only able to tile if you tile with movie render graph. Maybe it doesn't work through movie render queue, but then you are tied to using movie render graph, and if you're using a version pre 5.6, then you've got no tiling. So I kind of wasn't able to get a render out at 10K that I was particularly happy with. And then this is our 10K, looking a lot more like the viewport, nice and crisp as you zoom in. Gets the visibility of pixels is there, but this kind of zooming, pretty good. A little bit of like low shadow quality going on here, but generally looking as you'd expect from the viewport. 10K, no tiling needed, which is interesting. It's usually as you get up to like 11.5K, you start to need tiling with our plugin. I usually like to render at 12K and then downscale, even if I'm rendering it, even if my final output is like 10K. I think it's just nice to render at super high resolution, then downscale, keep it nice and smooth. So yeah, interesting about this like allocate history per pane thing setting, which seems to make it look a lot more like the viewport, but does increase the warm-up time massively for UE panoramic. This is annoying for test renders, obviously, because if you're unable to preview what you're looking at immediately, you're gonna have to do test renders, and if every test render takes at least 3 minutes to do, then that's gonna get a bit annoying compared to just pumping one out in like under 10 seconds with our plugin. So yeah, I was going to show the full message here in 5.6 for the panoramic rendering. So it's also got this new setting. This allows you to go higher res apparently. So yeah, longer description in this version. Store the render scene history per individual render. Consume a great deal of memory more, but enables temporal anti-aliasing and other history-based effects, denoisers, auto-exposure, lumen to work. Interesting that it allows auto-exposure. It'd be interesting to see how well that kind of works, because it's very much screen space based effect. So interesting. Might have a little look at that soon. Yeah, as I say, tiling wise, I didn't have a lot of luck, but I think it was because I wasn't using movie render graph. Maybe you do have to use that. You can't just use. So I'm guessing like this is a form of tiling because you're adding more steps here. But I think in the update, if you look at the roadmap, you can see that they say high resolution is now compatible with the 360. It's also got the same setting here actually, which is interesting. Page to system memory. Yeah, but maybe that should be tested with movie render graph instead. So yeah, now I've jumped around a bit there, but it's just interesting to see the time benchmarks, how, you know, our renders are generally quicker, and then also the kind of workflow differences, how it's kind of easier to just preview, easier to get an idea for what kind of render you're going to get out. Comes out looking as you expect, whereas if you're going with panoramic capture, you've got the need to re-render so that you know what's coming out. Each of those renders is going to take 3 minutes, or you've got to try and figure out how to make non-lumen anti-aliased renders look similar to the viewport, which is going to be really difficult. It's interesting to see that, you know, they handle scenes kind of similarly. Generally, the colors look the same, but when you get down to the details, a lot more smudging going on there. Oh yeah, I was going to see what this kind of bilinear sample thing was. Saves in a minute. Yeah, so this is what I found so far on comparing. I'm keen to try this in more levels, get more comparisons in. But it's just interesting to see that it's not really just a time thing. It's quite a nuanced question of how do you want to work? What's your workflow looking like? What are your needs? And you know, we're trying to cater for a much more kind of in-depth professional workflow. I'm sure Panoramic will come through with some more features down the line, but yeah, interesting to see this comparison of where it's at the moment. So this is what I'm talking about. This might be adding to the kind of lack of clarity there. Bilinear being fastest, but not as good results. So yeah, maybe I'll have a look at this cat more. Should really do it in the other level, but yeah, interesting to see that. Interesting to try and get UE Panoramic looking as good as ours, basically, if possible. And then if it hasn't got the time, then maybe it can also potentially produce as good results. So yeah, we're going to keep testing. I think that shouldn't be the final point. The final point of the video should be, by all means, ours is working way better, producing better results, better workflows, easier previews. As we've outlined in the past streams, there's loads of cool stuff you can do with it, loads of cool workflows, and we're going to be doing these streams every week. And just, oh, some disconnect there. Okay. Yeah, I was just saying, going to be doing these streams every week. This is our 8th one now, and just exploring interesting things you can do with immersive media. As we're testing and developing this, just going to keep trying to put out this information on how best to make awesome content. So feel free to chuck us any comments of things we could look at in future. But we'll be pumping these out every week, and also hanging out in the Discord at the same time every week. So any questions, you can feel free to jump in. If you want to show a project or something, super down for that. So yeah, thanks for tuning in this week. More topics to come. Thanks a lot.